thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Sarah and Shortlist Recruitment, for arranging this and giving a nobody a platform to speak. It's an honor being here, and there's been some legendary people from the community who've spoken on this stage. So, an honor to be here and sharing some insight. I hope you all find something out of this. I mean, I titled the session "Beginning Your ALM Journey for Power Platform." Primarily because I want to keep it very high level and very theoretical to start off with, mainly because I don't know the level of experience of everybody who's going to be joining. So hopefully there's something in here to take away for everyone. And if there's a particular subtopic you want to focus or deep dive on into later, we can plan that at a later date. So I'll just get started with the slide deck. So I'll start off with a little introduction about who I am and what I do. For those who don't know me in the community, I come from a bespoke.NET development background. So that was straight out of university, basically being an out and out pro dev. I actually landed in Dynamics CRM development by accident in 2010, working for a small partner. And that was with version 4 of Dynamics CRM at the time. And I stayed with every version since then, right through to present day when it became Power Platform and rebranded. So I'd say I came into the Power Platform space around 2019. So it's not been that long. And when I say Power Platform, I've only really touched Power Automate. So was that a question coming in there or? No, okay, we'll carry on.
Sorry, I'll mute everybody.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, I've been in the Power Platform space since about 2019, still being a developer, very hands-on, very techy, and I've been operating an independent contractor since 2013 in the UK. More recently, I've started to become more and more active in the community, helping out in the forums. I was recently awarded super user status, and I also started blogging recently through a lot of encouragement and support from people in the community. And those are the links to my LinkedIn and Twitter if anybody wants to reach out or have a conversation about anything, feel free to do so. Okay, so agenda. So what I'm planning to cover today, as I say, I'm going to keep it very high level, very theoretical. We'll start off talking about what is ALM and what it means for the Power Platform, at least from my perspective, from my experience, and what I kind of made out of it. The bulk of the presentation is going to be focused around what constitutes a healthy ALM strategy. What are the key principles that you need to consider when setting up your ALM process, and what benefits it brings to your program. And then I'm going to touch briefly on the tools that are available for ALM for the Power Platform. I'm not going to focus too much on this because that's going to become more of the how. So as I say, I want to keep this more about the what and the why rather than the how, and maybe the how we can focus on in a later session. And then towards the end, we'll have opportunity for Q&A, open Q&A on the subject, or if there's any burning questions that you think of as we go through the presentation, feel free to raise your hands or put them into the chat, whatever kind of you're comfortable with. Does that sound reasonable? Everyone's still okay with that? I've not put anyone to sleep yet. No, cool.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Cool. Okay, so on with the actual content then. So what does ALM mean for me? So ALM, the acronym itself stands for Application Lifecycle Management, as most of you are probably aware. But to me, it's really a combination of people, process, and tools and technology to facilitate the life cycle of software delivery. Now, this diagram on the right here I've taken from the Microsoft Docs site. And those of us who have been professionally delivering software for some time will be familiar with some of the concepts that are being depicted here. And this is really describing the stages that we go through in delivering software. So in the top here, we've got planning and tracking. This is really about setting your goals as to what you're trying to deliver in your software, and how you're going to plan to deliver it over a period of time. And then you get the actual the development and the unit testing of it. You're probably operating this as part of a sprint, and then you go on to deploy that through your series of environments, and then on an ongoing basis, you'll be operating that using in production, monitoring how that goes, and then learning from that. So what I'm trying to say here, this is really a cyclic process that you'll be iterating over a period of time, a number of times, and your application will then mature through that process. And that's what ALM is really about, covering all of these different activities in a manner that is robust, error-free, repeatable, and something that you can confidently rely upon to deliver your software. Okay, so the main characteristics I feel that are important for an ALM strategy are, as we see depicted here. So working from left to right, one of the main things is environment separation, and how we have our application or the system that you're delivering, how that is going to progress through the series of environments that you have, and what purpose each environment serves, who has access to it, what type of data you have in that environment. The next main principle I'd say is the development process, which this is really about how your makers and your developers are interacting or will be interacting with your environments, and how they go about their daily activities in terms of development, and what they do in terms of working with those environments. And I'm going to deep dive into each of these as we progress through the presentation, but I'm just going to give you a high level kind of overview of what I mean by each of these on this slide. So source control, probably for anyone who's been doing software delivery for a while will understand the kind of importance of source control, but it's basically a way of tracking over a period of time what changes are being made by who and when and for what purpose. We've got an element called versioning as well. I'll probably come on to that a bit later on in the presentation. A lot of the stuff that we talk about when it comes to ALM is around automation, how we automate the delivery of the software. Some people who talk about ALM tend to focus exclusively on the automation aspects and tend to overlook some of the other aspects which are also important. So, but it's not to undermine the importance of it. It's still a fairly significant factor here. The next point is around quality control. So a good ALM system will provide the ability to build in and integrate quality control measures in as part of the process, and be able to report on those things as well. And centralized reporting, I guess, is something that goes without saying, really. And for a healthy ALM, you want to be able to see centrally what's going on across your environments, what changes are being made, and how they are progressing through the life cycle. Something that often gets overlooked is monitoring in the production environment, how your users are using your application and your software. There may be some things that are not working quite as well or as well as you expect, but not necessarily throwing any errors to the user and just being kind of logged in the background somewhere. So how you factor those into your future phases of your development is also something I consider to be part of a healthy ALM strategy. So there's a hand raised in the audience. Is that a question? Do you want to come off mute and ask a question?
I think that's been up for a bit, to be honest.
Okay.
I'd move on from that.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, there's another hand raised now.
Gunjan, how are you doing?
Hey, Parvez, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for joining. Do you have a question?
No, sorry, that was me, fat fingers.
Okay, no worries. Thanks. Okay, cool. We'll move on to the next slide. So the first principle I spoke about was about environment separation. So what you see depicted here is a representation of what I would say is a minimalistic approach to your environment strategy that I would see being as part of an overall ALM strategy. So at the very least, you need a development environment where your makers and your developers would be making the changes and unit testing them. And the next one along is the test environment, as the name suggests, is where either your internal IT test team or your business users would be testing the application in a like real world scenario. So you'd have some data in there which is meaningful to the business, and you would be using that to, quality assure the application that's being built. And then towards the extreme right is the actual production environment, which is where the business is using the application that's been built. And the idea is, as we progress, as the application progresses from the left to the right, you're getting an increasing amount of stability and maturity in the application in terms of the quality and obviously the features that are being delivered as well. So that was a basic environment strategy. This would be something, what you see here is the total opposite end of the spectrum in terms of an environment strategy. And I've worked on enterprise scale projects where even a setup like this perhaps isn't enough to satisfy the needs of the program. But you see here, there's a number of different environments for different purposes. And we see here a single development environment, but there's no reason why that can't be morphed into something that supports multiple development environments depending on how you're structuring your application. There's a series of then different test environments, both for manual and automated acceptance. You don't necessarily need to separate them, but this is an example of what an advanced kind of environment strategy could potentially look like. There's an integration development. I'll call it integration development. The reason why it's development is because here would be where you'd typically build integration interfaces, not using technology within the Power Platform, but external, like an iPaaS platform, as an example. Then integration test environment is where is probably the first environment where all of your complete application with all integration interfaces come together for the first time and work together end to end. And this is probably the first place where you can test your entire feature set from end to end. Then you've got your typical UAT environment where the business stakeholders will be testing, and then training or a demo or a combination of both, and then pre-production, production. The concept, again, is very similar. The idea is that you want to, as we progress from left to right, we are getting an increased level of stability and maturity through that environment. Okay, move on to the next slide. So the next principle is around the development process. And this, as I mentioned on the earlier slide, is really about how the makers and developers interact with the set of environments that you have, primarily a development environment. So you may decide on a development strategy which incorporates only a single development environment, which is shared by all members of the team. And if you go down that approach, you need to make sure that when you are promoting changes or committing them to source control to promote to downstream environments, that needs to be a coordinated effort, or you've got a level of separation in there in terms of the solutions or segmented solutions that enables or makes your development team be able to commit only their changes to isolate them. So that process needs to be engineered such that it facilitates that way of working. So you need to think about how you would segment your solutions. And here I'm talking really about dataverse solutions, how you would separate them. how you manage dependencies as well across your solution estate, your environment estate. Again, is a critical part of your development process. And then what tools and processes you design to facilitate that. So how would your developers and your makers commit their changes from the development environment into source control? Because that's the way ALM really starts. So source control is your golden source of truth rather than anything you have in a development environment. Something I think it was Scott Giroux who mentioned in one of his podcasts that stayed with me for a long time was your development environment or any other environment is not your pet that you'd need to really look after. It's because everything is subject to source control, and that's what you really need to look after, source control. Okay, so the next thing is, again, this is part of your development process. It's really about identifying what your build artifacts are for the application that you're trying to deliver. A lot of people, when they talk about ALM, they are focusing almost exclusively on Dataverse solutions, and that may not be everything that constitutes your application. So you may have, for example, other build artifacts that are critical in the operation of your application, such as, for example, reference data that lives in Dataverse tables, or Microsoft Forms that you use to capture information from your users, or custom configuration within SharePoint library. So all of these things should be considered as build artifacts. So when I say build artifacts, this means you should be trying to design or engineer your development process such that anything you have in these build artifacts, you can source control, build, and automatically deploy as part of your ALM strategy. Now, I've put portals on there as one. Up until fairly recently, portal configuration was not something that was you could include into a solution. That's only come into GA recently. But prior to that, we had to rely on the PAC CLI to be able to take portal configuration from your development environment through to source control, and then downstream environments from that point onwards. Okay, so this slide is really depicting that entire process and trying to illustrate what ALM is really about. So you see on the left here, the commit stage. I've broken this development process down into 3 key areas. What I call the commit stage is really how your developers and makers are exporting and committing the changes out of that development environment where they've unit tested them and verified that they're working. How did those changes then enter into source control to kick off that whole ALM process? That's what the commit process is about. The next stage, the build process, is really about then collating those changes from source control automatically and then preparing the packages for deployment to downstream environments from that point onwards. And then deploy is probably the obvious one, deploying that package into your downstream environments from there. This second, lost my mouse. Okay, so source control. What does source control really mean? I've tried to put a lot of emphasis behind this because I see this being as the main starting point of an ALM strategy, and it's important because these are the questions that a good source control system should be able to help you answer or support you with. What changes are being made, and when I say what changes, I mean, if you think about this from the perspective of a Dataverse solution, so if, for example, a table is being changed, what's changing on that table? Is it a new column being introduced? Is it the form for that model-driven app table that's being changed? So exactly what is the granular level of change? A source control history would be able to tell you that. who made the change. So when a commit goes in, you've got one of the attributes that you've got against it is the author of that change. Who made that change, and when did they make it? And the other factor is the complete traceability, i.e., when the change was made, what work items or JIRA issues was it related to? Why did they make that change? And that an ALM strategy would give you full traceability of that. If the source control element of it has been implemented well, so you've got that complete traceability, and you've got that working both from the work item side as well as the commit side. So if you're looking at the commit in, say for example, is a commit in a Git repository in Azure DevOps, you should be able to see against that commit which are the related work items. And if you look at it from the work item side, whether it's a user story or a task, you should be able to see over a period of time what commits were made against that particular work item. So you've got the complete traceability going from either end. And likewise, when you're looking at a particular build that's run in an ALM platform, you should be able to see over a period of time which work items have associated changes included in that build or integrated into that build. So when it comes time to deploy that build, you know exactly what's going into that environment. In Git, you also get the ability to tag commits. So when you reach, for example, when you reach a major milestone in the commit history, you should be able to tag a commit. But this is something that you can configure and use a strategy that works for your own individual team and your own needs. But something I've seen work quite well is when a particular version is achieved in terms of the delivery of the application, then tagging the source commit, which generates that build with a version number, works quite well. And then that gives you the ability to then trace back over history to a state and source control to identify what particular version of the code is deployed in a build in a particular environment. And then branching strategies also come into source control. So so over a period of time, you may have, for example, version 2 of your application that hits your production environment. And at that point in time, your developers or makers could already be working on version 5 in the development environment. So development has moved several versions ahead of production. So at that point in time, you probably need to take a branch off the version of the commit that's in production in order to be able to make urgent or high priority bug fixes as part of a hotfix strategy. And that's something that source control can facilitate as well. Okay, so the next thing really to talk about is versioning and dependency management. So we spoke a couple of slides ago about build artifacts, and as an example here, what I'm demonstrating is, say for example, in an application, we've got four different types of build artifacts. We've got your custom Dataverse solutions, you've got your third-party solutions, you've got reference data that lives in Dataverse, and some custom SharePoint configuration as an example. And all of those make up your package that you're delivering as part of build version 2.8.60. So what I'm saying here is that this package, the way we configure it is to say these versions are compatible with each other as part of this particular build version. And if a change is made to any of these, the source code for any of these build artifacts, then that generates a new build version for the package. And you can see here the version numbers have changed for the components within the package that have changed. So we know, therefore, that these are the versions that are compatible for this particular package. Okay, so the next thing is quality control measures and how we can integrate those into an ALM strategy. Now, there's various options available for this, and I'm only covering these from a very high level, a theoretical perspective, rather than showing you the how. But just to list these out, we've got branch policies or protection rules that you can configure against your source control branches. This is to say that changes can't be committed to source control unless they satisfy certain rules. And examples of some of those rules could be getting a valid code review from a panel of approvers, as an example. Or another policy you can configure is there's at least one valid work item or user story that's associated with the commit. Also, you can configure things like the build completes successfully if your commit was to be allowed to go into source control. That's something also you can configure as a branch policy. So what I'm saying is that this is a way of enforcing some quality control measures even before your changes are allowed to go into source control. It really catches these sorts of issues early. So code reviews I spoke about briefly, and these could be done as part of a Git pull request using that as a vehicle. Automated test execution. There's been a lot of focus recently in the community using things like Fake XRM Easy as a unit testing framework particularly for Dynamics projects. If you build those sorts of unit tests and you can package those up really well, you can actually get those to be executed as part of a build process that's triggered in your ALM process, either using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, whatever platform you choose to use. But the point is, if any of those unit tests fail as a result of a change that's being committed, that can be flagged up as a build failure, and that can even prevent a commit from going into source control. So you've got that earlier level of protection against potential changes that could break a build. A solution checker is something that's worth a mention here as well. What you can do is integrate the execution of that automatically into your build as well. So you've got some automatic verification against changes going in, and make sure there's no kind of failures being caused there as well. So those are just examples of quality control measures that you can put into an ALM approach. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is monitoring, reporting, and logging. And there's different ways to implement some of this stuff. Some things you get out of the box used in the Power Platform Admin Center. There's some analytics in there that you can use, and some of that is quite good. It gives you insight into things like failing cloud flows for you to then monitor on an ongoing basis, and then identify whether there's any remedial work you need to do and planning into future sprints to resolve those things. If you're exceeding or using your API limits, that's also something that's reported in there as well. So that's worth keeping an eye on. There's also more granular level of logs that you can capture. Things like your run history within Power Automate. If you're using Dataverse, then you've got your asynchronous system job log Dataverse, and also if you've got some custom Dataverse plugins, then potentially trace logs in there that you can use to identify any issues on an ongoing monitoring basis and plan to refactor anything that's needed. And then there's also the ability now to log any custom errors to Azure App Insights and use that as the basis of monitoring. That's also something that's coming recently. I've not done too much with that, so I'm aware of it, but that's probably something that's worth exploring as well. But that would require making sure that any customization or development that you've done is actually is configured to kind of log those errors in those areas, so then you've got the ability to monitor those things. Okay, and just approaching towards the end of the presentation, this is really creeping into the hows now. So it's probably something to take away as a bit of homework if you want to explore this further, or there's some recommendations of tools here that are available for implementing a healthy ALM strategy. So the first one is obviously Azure DevOps. It's Microsoft's platform, and Microsoft recently have made available the Power Platform Build Tools extension for Azure DevOps. So there's a suite of tasks and tools in there to help you realize your ALM goals. There's a link there to some documentation around that. I'm also aware there are other partners, especially in the UK, that have published Azure DevOps extensions to help implement ALM strategies for Power Platform. I think HCL have one, I believe Cloud Thing and Curve had one, and I've worked with Capgemini as one as well. So there's lots of options there to look at. But one of the main ones that I particularly like is the Power DevOps tools. This was something that's been around for a very long time, built by an MVP called Wael Hamzi. He's based in the UK as well. Very, very mature product offering there. And I think this has been around even before Microsoft's version came out. So very, very rich in terms of capability. I'd highly recommend looking at that. The other one is GitHub Actions, obviously, as your ALM platform, and then Microsoft Power Platform GitHub Actions. Now, I've worked with both over the last 4 or 5 years now, and most recently using GitHub Actions. And I would have to say my preference is definitely Azure DevOps. It just feels richer in terms of what you can do with it, particularly the Ed is laughing there. Particularly the classic pipeline designer, I think, is particularly useful, especially when you've got limited experience or knowledge of how things like YAML work. But that's not to take anything away from GitHub Actions. There's still, fairly mature things you can do there in terms of ALM, and it's always getting better. Microsoft are investing heavily into this, so it's not something I'd rule out. I'd say pick the tool that's right for your team and for your organization, and do what works for you. A couple of other options here. The ALM Accelerator. This is something that, I've not done too much with it. I'm aware of it, but from my understanding, it gives you basically a nice UI to work over the top of Azure DevOps effectively. So you can interact with Azure DevOps pipelines in a more friendly way, if you like. Probably something to look at if you don't already have ALM skills in-house or a healthy ALM in place already. And now, obviously, recently, something becoming more and more mature are the in-platform pipelines as an option. Again, not something I've done much with, but if you don't have any ALM in place already, and you consider your program or project to be of a simple nature, this is probably something to look at, because it gives you the ability to implement ALM in a low code way, if you like, should you say. Okay, that brings me to the end of the presentation. That's all I had in terms of slides. So I guess we can open up for Q&A. Thank you all for your attention and patience for listening to me rambling on about an ALM. So it's amazing to see so many people join, and for on an afternoon for such a dry topic. It's just people embracing this sort of stuff is really good to see. So thank you everyone. We've got some hands being raised here. Oh, Graham, how are you doing?
Hi, Base. Yeah, good. Yeah, very, very entertaining talk. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham.
Have you got any thoughts? I'm sorry to spring this on you, but have you got any thoughts about any changes you might make to your strategy if you have a strong citizen developer community? Not sure if you've come across it, but
no, it's a great question actually. So I'm working with a client in the higher education sector at the moment. I don't know, Ed, if you want to come in here. But basically, what we've built for your team, Ed, at this client is in the space is what Graham is talking about here. Is low-code citizen developer type applications, and what we've built is an ALM strategy which reflects pretty much what I've presented here today. and I mean, it goes without saying, it requires a lot of education and support and engagement, understanding what's required. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility to design something that is quite powerful, quite thorough. Ed, I don't know if you want to share any insight into our experiences at this client.
Yeah, thanks, Parvez. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm the plant in the audience, and I can honestly say Parvez has been legendary, sort of working with us on this. So Graham, like, we were in this sort of situation where we wanted to professionalize what we were doing in the Power Platform space, and like part of this, of course, was moving towards an ALM strategy. We were very fortunate that obviously Parvez brought the experience with us. I was laughing earlier because it was in the context of GitHub Actions. And it has meant that although we are a sort of a citizen dev based area with some sort of pro dev combination, we're able to use like GitHub Actions to really professionalize between three major environments, you know, with all the goodness that comes with it. And Parvez has also been helping us to understand like how that works, so we can start to troubleshoot and customize, including new solutions that we might build to bring those into the ALM process. In other words, so that we're not absolutely dependent on him servicing or supporting, you know, our own strategy as well. So that has worked really well, and it's really helping us to professionalize. We did consider pipelines as well, but Parvez, obviously I'll hand it back to you in terms of your thoughts on that. Parvez advised us that you know, that was still a little bit too immature, and you know, ultimately we would want to keep it GitHub Actions. Hope that helps a bit, and if you want to take offline or anything, happy to do it.
Yeah,
Parvez.
yeah. So reading that back to you, then it sounds like a well put together strategy and education can mean that you sort of bring your citizens a little bit closer to what we do, but we bring our automation means it's easier for them rather than the, you know, CLI, for example, that we're sort of used to. That sounds to sum it up. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's exactly what we've done at this client. Really, we've engineered the process to make basically mask away some of the complexities around things like source control, and providing a more user-friendly way of invoking the commit, for as an example. Just simplifying stuff like that.
Perfect. I've taken too much of your time. Thanks, Parvez, and thanks for the input. Cheers.
Cheers, Graham. Thanks. Keith, hi.
Hi, Parvez. Great session. Thank you very much for that. That was brilliant. Important subject, and I like the high overview that you covered as well. So yeah, great job. Really well done. Question I've got is more of a practical question. Let's say if you've got an environment strategy, you might look at several for the different UAT, load testing, whatever it may be. Let's say you've got 10 environments. If you've got a client and they've got a limited budget, and you've got to think about multiple users in multiple environments, have you ever come across that challenge? And if so, how do you deal with that?
It's a great question, actually. So yeah, I guess the challenge really comes down to your budget constraints are going to be a big driver around this. I think the bulk of the consumption in terms of data usage would really come down to the space usage would come down to how much data you have. So you obviously in the lower environments, when I say lower environments, I'm talking about, you know, your dev and your unit test environments. You probably don't need all excuse me, all of your data in there. So one way of mitigating against hitting those limits would be to make sure that your full data set only goes into really the critical environments that you want to perform your load testing, your performance testing in, and your lower environments only have, you know, your Mickey Mouse data or synthesized data that you've put together for the purpose of unit testing. That would be probably the obvious way of mitigating against that issue. But other than that, I think it requires some careful management in terms of understanding what data goes into what environment and why, and only, doing the bare minimum to make sure only the necessary environments receive the data that's needed. I don't know if that answered the question.
It does. Perfect. Thank you.
Stuart, hi.
Hi Parvez, how you doing, mate? Good session. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thanks.
The
Thanks for doing
question
it.
I have, no problem, mate. No problem. We had a lot on this. The question I have: we are experimenting at the moment with a single developer environment and using Power Platform patches. Can you let the audience know what experience you have with the positives and negatives of that approach?
Yeah, so patches are a funny one. So Microsoft introduced patch solutions a few years ago when the whole managed solution story wasn't that mature, and there were some issues identified with it. But if you look at the documentation now, they actually advise against using patch solutions, mainly because they introduce a level of complexity in terms of how customizations merge across managed solutions, and you get some unexpected behavior in certain scenarios, and it complicates things like ALM and things like that. So patch solutions, the short answer is patch solutions are not recommended for use right now, mainly because managed solutions are so much better in terms of maturity and working with them with ALM.
Yeah, we've got an interesting approach that we've been discussing with our colleagues at Microsoft that I'll maybe very quickly share if that's okay. So
yeah, sure.
we do is we pull an unmanaged patch from our dev source environment where the developers are working on their bits and pieces and making the changes and so on. When that patch is finished and they've done their part, we deploy that as an unmanaged solution into our what we call build environment. In terms of moving to UAT, QA, etc., that's all taken from the build environment. So think of the build environment as your source.
Yeah.
What's nice with that is if we get an error, we can pull it out basically. It's working well so far, if I'm honest. I am worried though, based on the advice we've seen from Microsoft around managed solutions and things. It may come unstuck at some point, but we've managed a good 7, 8, 9 months now. It's an interesting approach, and as I say, it is experimental at the moment for us. We're not sure, but it works for smaller ones, I'm finding.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in a similar setup before. There are some potential issues that can arise as a result of this sort of setup, but I mean, as you say, it generally works as long as you're aware of some of the nuances that come with that sort of approach. So as an example, things like deletion of components won't work naturally in that sort of setup. So you need to consider how you manage that. But from what you're describing, you're only using patches as a way to transfer your customizations from your primary dev environment to your build environment. And that's something that I think should be okay, but particularly because you're not actually deploying those patches downstream from that point onwards. From what I'm understanding anyway.
Use it for a sprint. So basically what we do is in sprint, each developer builds a patch for each change that they're making. They deploy the patches that are ready. Any that are, we have a change freeze on a Friday, a deployment on a Wednesday, basically. So from the Friday onwards, you don't move anything else in. Because that's still in flight. There's no time to QA test it and stuff. Only completed and tested stuff moves over. Then at the end of the sprint, we roll up to a major version and deploy the one solution to QA, UAT, etc.
That generally works okay. But I mean, you probably, if you wanted to avoid patches altogether, you could probably implement or engineer a similar process using normal unmanaged solutions as a transfer solution rather than a patch. But it's the same principle. I guess the only difference will be you may have to build something custom to transfer the components from your transfer solution into the parent solution as opposed to just rolling up the patch. Other than that, it should be a similar principle.
The deletion stuff, we've almost came unstuck with that before. I'll be honest, we were scratching our head and we were like, we've deployed this, why is this field still here? Wait a minute, that's an unmanaged solution. An unmanaged solutions don't delete. But yeah, it's definitely the one pitfall we've seen so far, that we were scratching our heads on at first. So it's one to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean the other challenge is when you roll up or clone a solution, all the patches that are present against that solution go with it at the same time. So that means only one person can commit their patch at any point in time, and you just need to be careful around how you manage that. So yeah, there's a few pitfalls, but generally it does work.
Cool. Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate you sharing your experience.
No worries. Cheers. Thanks, Stuart. Sam, hey.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks very much for the session.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. How you doing?
So when you were chatting with Charles just a minute ago, you mentioned that maybe the pipelines are a little bit immature at the moment. What is it that you'd want to see go into those pipelines that would make you go, actually, I feel this is becoming the right solution?
Yeah, so I mean I've not done much with the in-platform pipelines, if I'm honest, but last time I looked at them, the ability to commit changes from a solution to source control, as an example, was something that had to be built in as an extension. So you had to configure that using Cloud Flows, as an example. Well, that's what I saw from the documentation. Now, it might be just me. I've just not had a great experience with Cloud Flows. I found that sometimes there was a tendency for them to fail in certain scenarios if they weren't designed or built well, and that presents a possibility of the process being compromised potentially if it does fail, and a change may not successfully commit to source control as a result. So for that reason, my preference would be to keep the ALM part of it outside of the platform rather than inside. It just gives me a bit more confidence around that. The other issue I had around it was that it only worked with one solution at a time. And when I'm working on an enterprise scale project, it's more often than not, it's more than a handful of solutions we're working with rather than just one.
Yeah, I thought source control might be the ticket, because it's an interesting one, because like I'm looking at this, like our whole ALM strategy at the moment for my organization, and it's like, on one hand, I don't want to exclude like people from like a low code or no technical background, but I also have to meet like a fairly complex CI/CD strategy. So it's weighing up, do I have one solution that fits all, or do I have to start thinking that I have to have some separation? But Cheers.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, if there was one lesson I wanted everyone to take away from this, I'd say engineer your ALM process to meet the needs of your team. You know the skills that you've got in your team and the experience you have. There's no point over engineering it if people aren't going to be able to work with that process if the knowledge isn't there. So make sure you consider all of those factors when you're designing your ALM processes. Abbas, hi, how you doing?
Hi, Parvez. Great session. Thank you for that. Just a quick guide on this one. What is your recommendation if you're working in multiple teams? Let's say you have got 3 or 4 dev teams working on different work streams, and you need to merge your code, your changes at one point, but everyone has got their own dev instance. I'm talking about sandbox. What is the best way of making sure that your changes are merged? I can't see any automated solution here, but how do you manage it? What's your advice on that one, just for future reference?
Yeah, no, great question, and it's a challenge that a lot of people are asking about, actually, and it really comes down to how you're gonna organize your teams and how you're gonna organize your development processes. In my experience, it's going to be quite hard if individual members of the team have their own dedicated development environment, because then you're going to spend, you might end up in a situation you're spending more time trying to merge your customizations into a single consolidated solution, as opposed to actually doing the design and build work. And that's probably not something you can easily justify to your stakeholders. So it's always better, in my experience, to have a shared development environment where there's multiple people working in a single development environment, but you have organized your solutions or segmented your solutions in a manner that facilitates parallel development. So, for example, you might have one solution for plugins, as an example, and a separate solution for tables and forms for Dataverse. And at the start of your sprint, you can organize your team members to say, so-and-so is going to be working on a plugin. A plugin is going to take longer to develop, so they own that solution for the duration of that sprint. And somebody else is going to be working on tables and data model, so they're only working in a separate solution. And therefore, they respectively know when each of their changes are complete and ready to go, ready to be committed. And those changes can then be committed in isolation from each other. So just having, some upfront thinking around how you segment your solutions, I think is really helpful in terms of organizing that and making sure that people don't end up treading on each other's toes or causing problems for each other when it comes to dependencies and things like that. But as I say, it's a really good question and a very common challenge that I've spoke at length about with a lot of people from the community. Not an easy one to answer.
No, it's not, Jeff. I've seen one today. So basically, there are a couple of dev teams, and in every team there are at least 5 to 10 people working. And you will see that one of the field is missing in one environment, or one of the entity is missing, customizations are missing, and you only find out, when you try to merge your changes. Obviously, I think communication is the main thing here.
100%.
But unfortunately,
100%,
there isn't anything automated. But yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, and thanks, Parvez.
No worries.
Again, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, as I say, communication and coordination is a big factor of engineering your development process. What I've got in my current client, actually, we've got a dedicated Teams channel for coordinating developer activity for each solution. So we know exactly who's working on what and for which user story, just to make sure we're not causing dependency issues, we're not overwriting each other's changes, that kind of stuff. It probably comes down to a bit of common sense as well, actually.
Thank you.
Can I add a little something that might be useful for you, Abbas? There's a tool on XLM Toolbox called Solution Components Mover. It does have some limitations, but effectively we, on a previous project, were in a bit of a mess. We had 54 solutions or something ridiculous like that, inherited the product from another partner, and it was a bit of a mess. We took some time to do basically exactly what Parvez said. Segment it around, this one has forms and views, this one has cloud flows in it, this one has plugins in it. And we had a lot of success with using the Solution Components Mover to bring the 54 solutions down to, I think we ended up with about 6. It is a really, really great tool, but it does have some limitations. So if you are going to use it for anything, then do read up on it before you do. But if you're looking to get out of a bit of a mess, then it's useful for bringing things into one solution as opposed to 10.
Yeah, great shout, Stuart. Getting that consolidated baseline of your solutions is absolute paramount. Yeah, really good shout.
Yeah. It's bloody painful doing it, mind you, but yeah, it's painful doing it, but once it's done, it's such a worthwhile task.
100%.
Thank you.
Has anyone got any other questions or comments before we wrap up? I know Gulshan's asked for those links. Parvez, if I don't know if we can post it in the Q&A or make it available after the session.
Yeah, sure, we'll do. Doesn't the hand gone up? Arham, how you doing, bro?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. I just wanted to say it's been really, really helpful. So yeah, I came in here working with a client that's kind of doing manual deployments, having to whisper. I'm in the office at the moment. But so this has been really, really helpful with these different options and kind of Stuart's input as well. I've not worked with the Solution Components Mover. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks a lot. This is really useful stuff that I can kind of build into my remediation plan. So yeah, thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you for joining. Sorry, there's Adam as well. Adam, did you have a question?
Hi, Parvez. Yeah, thanks. It was just on the isolation between devs that you talked about. Currently, all of our work is done within shared environments. And I was just wondering, is it possible to get some level of isolation and the ability to work separately within the same solutions and then merge these changes together without having to go through a full ALM implementation, or is it something that needs to be completely done start to finish to get those levels of separation between different devs?
No, I think we've probably touched on some of this earlier, but basically the idea is you need to be able to organize your solutions in a way that makes sense both from a deployment perspective, but also from the perspective of developers and makers working on those components within those solutions. So I think the short answer is as long as you manage both of those factors, you're okay. But yeah, if you try and go too granular in terms of your isolation, you're more than likely to run into issues in terms of deployment. So it's a balancing act between the two, I think is a short answer.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Are we done with questions? No more hands up. Brilliant. That was brilliant, really interesting. It was a really fast hour as well, which is a sign of a good session. Okay, cool. So we can get those links. I can share them somehow maybe, and the recording will be available tomorrow. But yeah, thanks so much everybody for coming, and especially Parvez. That was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you for having me. Hope
Thanks,
it's been useful.
Parvez.
Thank you so much.
Really good.
Thanks, Parvez. Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you.